Done.
Is it recording?
Yes, it's recording. Sorry.
Okay, good. Awesome. Okay, just a quick recap. First thing to note for folks is to share that the dates here have changed. And Jennifer Crawley, anything else to comment on the specifics of the date? The dates, does this look good?
Yeah, no, those, like you said, are right in line with OpenJS, so we're good.
Okay. So for folks, just to be aware, we'll need you available leading up to just after the early bird submission deadline for reviewing talks, and then after the main CFP closes on February 18th. Okay, so other updates. We do have a blog post, so I know some of you have seen it, but if you haven't already, Roxanne put together a post announcing the program committee. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. We've got that up. I think it went out on Twitter and is or should be going out on LinkedIn as well. Again, we've got the dates there. And we'll also feature folks on the CDCon website when it goes live later this month. So let us know if there's a specific headshot you'd like to use instead of the ones we've used, or any bios or things. We'll send those out for review. And thanks to those who did already retweet and share that news. Any questions on that, comments? Okay, so the main thing today is around the call for papers. So we're working towards December 17th, which is next Friday, as a target date for selecting the tracks we'll put into the call for papers. So this is the document Cara put together. Let me just drop a link. And this is based on last year's plus the discussion that happened at the first meeting. And then right at the bottom, folks have been throwing in additional suggestions. So one thing, we'll go into the discussion around the additional ones, but one thing I just wanted to say on the shared tracks. So last time we had a really good response about doing shared tracks with OpenJS. So we had a meeting with them to see how in practice this would work. And to just keep things simple on the call for paper side, we're each going to maintain our own call for papers. So they'll have their set of tracks that they put forward, and we'll have our set of tracks. And then after all the submissions are put in, that's when we'll combine talks into common tracks and put those on the schedules for both events. So for example, I think they really liked testing and automation. So if we have some talks in that track, we'll select the best ones of our one and combine it with talks from their call for papers. Similar thing for security. And then those tracks will be available on both OpenJS Conference and CDCon. So does that make sense? Am I explaining that well? I think it's a long-winded way of saying we're not going to try and have this joint call for proposal and have this committee work with their committee at the same time, because it's just too much coordination needed. Okay, so from there, let's go into some of the details of the different tracks. And do we have, okay, we had a suggestion from Roxanne, who's not on the call. Is Jennifer Hooper here?
I am, yes.
Oh, okay, Jennifer. Yeah, do you want to, we can start with that idea you put through, and I've seen Jeremy has some comments, so let's use that as a starting point for discussion.
Yeah, so the reason this really stuck out to me is, well, there's kind of multiple reasons, but we're seeing in a lot of the reports and things that come out that there's just a lot of skill set gaps and things that people really need to know. Secondly, just understanding what it really means to, what all the tools are, what the whole landscape is, all of those things. Sometimes a lot of people, it's hard to kind of get yourself established in this. I'm trying to hire a dev advocate, for example, and it's definitely hard to find people with all the right skills for all of this. So all of those things together with looking at like KubeCon attendees being, really heavily novices, getting more and more participation from people overseas, getting people who really want to focus on continuing to evolve their skills because things change almost on a daily basis. It just felt like we could have a really great, kind of continuous learning track that could touch in different areas. These things wouldn't necessarily have to be unique there, but it would also give us a really good way of reaching out to people in advance and saying, and trying to attract them to the show to say, hey, we're going to have some tracks that are focused on A, B, and C. What are the questions that you have? And maybe this is a good area that, someone from the CDF is going to talk about some of the main areas that get rolled up into some of the most common pain points or challenges or things you need to know if you're a beginner, a novice, an expert, or whatever the case is. So anyways, that's my spiel.
Okay, any thoughts from folks?
I think it's good to have a place for people to have the opportunity, if they are not super well versed in this area, to have a chance to be onboarded. So it's inclusive. I think it's good to have that. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's like a specific name of a track, but somewhere that this will be included would be good.
Yeah, I was playing with the idea of continuous learning, it doesn't have to be that, it's kind of dumb, but, just having something that's kind of a theme that says, hey, learning is always an important thing for all of us. And so we're going to focus on having some topics that fit into that category. And then people could even pre-assign themselves based on, because we definitely get that feedback too, that, when you're speaking to someone who knows what you're talking about, like they have that base level of knowledge, you have a great conversation, but there's a lot of people who are really interested, but because they don't have that knowledge and because a lot of people are afraid of asking questions and appearing, like uninformed, stupid, whatever their concerns are, it just felt like there was a lot of really great ways to do this. Plus, we're, trying to get more students and people engaged in these technologies. It just also felt like it was a great on-ramp for, doing some communications with that, as well as, being able to leverage the assets that come out of it as we move forward.
What question?
Sorry. Go ahead.
So my question is, do we want this as a track, or would it be better to do like one of those day zero type deals where the whole day is focused on continuous learning, where you get some of your rock stars that have been in this to pair, with this type of material if we wanted, or, have people submit for day one and then intersperse maybe panels with rock stars to keep it like engaging and fun, so you can actually talk to your mentor via whatever, Zoom or whatever in between sessions, where there's like, again, that whole idea of like a hallway track. So keeping with the theme of continuous learning, having people submit for like a day zero event, and then also pairing it with some in between rockstar sessions where they give 10 minutes on their lessons learned and like why this is important to always continuously keep yourself fresh, your skills fresh.
Yeah, it could be like a whole today I learned thing, like a whole theme that goes through everything. And I really like the day zero, because then if someone really wanted to get a fast track on learning something, like even with the events that you do, it could be a reference to, hey, if you're not familiar with this, check out the video for the replay, because those would be available, wouldn't they, on the day? So you could even point to that as part of the as part of the event to say, hey, if you're not familiar with this term, you might want to refer to these things in advance.
I have a question.
So then you're
sorry. No,
I was just going to say, so the question, it begs the question, if we do a day zero, that changes somewhat the dynamics of the conference, like the days set aside, the days that have been mentioned already, the days set aside, rental of the venue, there's some aspects there that I think, while I like the idea of, hey, here's the learning track or that kind of thing to kickstart you into the conference, I have a feeling that would be an obstacle that we might have to deal with.
Continuing on those thoughts, that's what I was thinking as well. To begin with, if we have day 0, then it shouldn't be only for beginners, because that means that we might exclude 80% of the people, right? Or whatever the percentage is. And if it is not day 0, then kind of having beginners track would somehow conflict with other tracks, because what says that the talk about performance or whatever the other tracks are is not a beginner talk as well, right? So maybe it would make more sense to kind of label talks. Okay, you have tracks like performance, this and this, OPA, whatever the tracks are, and then it can be a label on them, beginner, intermediary, hard, and we can organize it in a way that somebody can follow the talks that are only for the beginners, for example, right? And only for not beginners. But if it's only if there is a full track beginner, then that would definitely be conflicting with other tracks.
So Victor, I like your point on I'm sorry, Jennifer.
No, go ahead.
With labeling like what level the talk is it beginner, intermediate, or advanced? But I think the feedback that I heard from KubeCon was that the day 0 events were half in person, half virtual, and people were like, I would have just stayed home and done it virtually instead of flying in a day earlier. So what if we think about this in terms of just a virtual day, right? So like people that are on site can do what they need to do, which is set up their booths, do whatever, and then you know, set their schedules based on this, where it's not, to Jeremy's point, conflicting with extra space needs, costs, stuff like that, and then continuing to have the beginner, intermediate, and advanced labels on sessions, so that people can kind of get an idea of what each track looks like, and maybe that's what it is, right? Maybe the day is just an intro to each kind of track, and then you have the full agenda for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
So let me just jump in with a few of just the logistics. So for a day 0, I think we're a bit limited on space on the Monday. And on the virtual side, I think we're still investigating our options, but we're staying. One thing that seems clear is we are going to stay away from virtual speakers for the event, just because it's really hard to manage. And some of the feedback for the in-person attendees is they don't want to sit in a room and watch a pre-recorded presentation. That being said, one more thing. We do label the tracks in general. So each talk is qualified with the beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So we can keep doing that. But what I'm hearing is it does sound like there's a need. Like the beginner content isn't always beginner content. It's not a clearly kind of 101 type session. So maybe there is a need for that clearly positioned set of talks, which may or may not be a track.
I don't want to.
Independently of.
Go ahead.
Why don't we go, Jennifer, then Victor?
Okay. One idea I have, and this is more work, but I don't think it's a whole lot more work, is, you know, kind of taking the idea of the matchmaking with a rock star or something like that. What if we created some video content or something to watch, and we had like a kind of an office hoursy, you know, kind of, hey, meet up with your, you know, we'll have some open hours for the, you know, maybe like every second Thursday before, leading up to the event or something, would be, you know, hey, you could come and talk about this subject. Here's some materials you can come talk about, and it could be intermixed. It could progressively get more, you know, so it could be a great way to market the event. It could be a great way to create content that we would continue to use and reference in some of the other things, but it wouldn't interfere with the event.
Yeah, doing stuff ahead of the event might be a nice way to tackle this. Okay, Victor?
I forgot what I wanted to say.
I'm sorry.
we'll come back to you.
It's perfectly fine.
So Jennifer S.
I'm sorry.
I was going to go. Jennifer S., did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, like I wanted to ask about for example, what would you like to know? Like, how would this be? Because it sounds to me like I will present to people who need to be more situated on how the landscape is. but like, how do we find out what people would like to know? Like, what is the plan? What was the idea on that?
My idea there was that we could, put out some polls. We could ask people through social. We could put it in the newsletters and ask people for feedback. There's a number of different ways we can engage through the CDF channels, and then we all could amplify through our channels or get other people to as well. The question is just what makes the most sense in terms of what we can manage. But the more that I think we can get people engaged and create content that they actually want to hear about, the more beneficial the conference will be and the more useful the content that we create and provide and enable to be presented is going to be for the audience. So it's kind of like crowdsourcing some of the content. And if we are doing something in advance, if we choose to do that, it could be really easy to do it through that. Like it's just kind of a, we could collect, hey, we're doing it on this subject today because you all voted on this. Next week, we'll talk about one of these 3 things. What do you want to talk about? I'm not saying it has to be exactly that way, but I think there's a lot of ways we could do it without a lot of calories that it would take us to manage it.
And then, so we would grab this information throughout these months prior and then like call and then have some presentation from us, or like use that as a way to filter the program submissions. Is that like, okay?
Yeah, it could be, or it could be like when Tracy gives her all hands, she could, grab some of the big themes and talk about those, like, hey, we really got people's input. This is what we're seeing. That combined with the CI/CD or the CD trends data. I think there's lots of ways that we could use it. It just depends on what we think is the most useful and how we want to collectively manage all of this.
Mm-hmm. Another thought, one last thought on that is like it could also potentially be one theme for a keynote to basically like update people about how things are. I'm not sure how big this continuous learning. I know that there could be like Victor said, in performance, in other tracks, there could be a beginner's level, but in this like maybe some summary of where we are and where things are, like the update, like it sounds like the continuous learning is like, it's not a beginner's thing, it's like just something for people who may be feeling lost because there's so much in the landscape, perhaps is a good keynote.
And the other thing it's good with too is following up after the event, asking people what they wanted to learn. And then, maybe once a quarter, there's a meetup where we talk about that kind of stuff or something. I mean, so there's lots of ways that you can keep the conversation going and keep engagement going. Being continuously asked that question to keep it, and then that'll build for next year as well, or the year after.
Okay. Any last thoughts? I'm going to put a pause on this discussion for 3 minutes and we'll move to another topic. But I think that's good. Jeremy's keynote last year, actually, lots of people had that feedback. He kind of covered a lot of the different terms in the space, and that was on day 2, and people were like, oh, we wish this had been the keynote on day 1 because at least it orients us for expectations of what these different terms are. So that keynote idea could be another nice way of doing it. I like the suggestions coming here. And maybe doing some of that ahead of time so it's available. So ahead of the track, we can be like, here's some homework. You can go watch this video and it's your precursor to this track. And then it gives you pointers to what the different sessions, how they all connect together. That could work. But certainly making sure we have that content and folks welcome would be awesome.
We can even do some fun polls, like some, what does this term mean? And, put some, just to drive more interest and get more people on social. I mean, I think there's lots of ways we can play with this.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Oh, go ahead.
So I feel like, this is just my only real comment, I don't disagree really with any of what we've said, other than what kind of keeps nibbling in the back of my head is I still hear consistently at conferences, like, I wish there was a track for the beginners or a 101 track not everybody's going to do everything out of that track. Like they're not always going to stay in that, but I still hear that even in, the conferences I've been over the last months.
But if the tracks are labeled as beginner, can't we just pull it out in the marketing and say, here's a 101 path for you, and just list out all of the beginner tracks without actually having to have, do you know what I mean? Like make it easy for the attendees, say, here are all the beginners, and then they can just build their schedule.
How about we abandon the tracks that we have planned right now and just have beginner, intermediary, black belt, and whatever? We can just make tracks that are the level of knowledge, and within that track, it can be different subjects, right? This or that. I mean, that was extremely successful in DockerCon. DockerCon had tracks like that. Black belt, your ninja, excellent. You got to black belt track, right?
Interesting.
So it's just kind of doing inverse. So within the track, you can have labels, this or that, just like within the current tracks, we have labels that is a level. We can just invert it. And I think that because the same argument that you said, and I agree, that people say, hey, I wish there was a beginner track. There is exactly the same argument. Hey, I wish there is a ninja track. It's not only for beginners. Everything we say about beginners applies to other levels as well.
Yeah, it feels harder to do when we cover a range of topics, and some people would want 101, say for, I don't know, security, where others might feel they're more advanced for different things. But, yeah, interesting. Yeah. Okay, I am going to pause it now on that profound note, and let's chew on that, and we'll follow up with some things in the mailing list and see what we can, how that, come up with some proposals. Okay, so some other suggestions on topics, just going back to the notes. Jennifer S., do you want to just highlight the ideas around performance and source control strategy?
Yeah, well, this comes from like talking to some people and also my own experience with like things that still happen, like, and thinking of like the meaty content stuff like, so yeah, I still in teams, no matter which team, when I'm starting a project, we are like, as you start, it seems almost impossible to prevent like build times getting longer and longer. So like would be good to put it out there to see how people are like tackling these things, like caching techniques, etc. like I put in there. And the basically processes as well, that it's like that people can add to like avoid those things happening, and like how the teams behave. And so there's like a bit of a leadership and processes that can be tooling put in place. There could be also like what people do backwards when they could be case studies of like long builds. And on the source control strategy as well, again, like some teams start with a monorepo and then becomes a bit of a hell for managing, but then they start splitting things. And it's like, again, it's the story, join a new team, there's senior engineers, and we are like creating different repositories to like make things well componentized, but then there's a lot of repetition in creating, in delivering, like it's very difficult to make them all like when putting the pieces together and testing, it is quite of a problem for managing that. And it becomes like you have to change several repositories at the same time, like every time you need to deliver a new change. So very common problems that people to this day, like very senior engineers have. So I feel like that there could be good conversations, good content, stories. And I mean, I'm very interested myself, I like case studies and people having how the problems they have and how they are dealing with it in the situation. So I thought that maybe, I know like source control strategy is the name of a track. I may say like might not be the best thing, but I would like to include that somewhere that could match and then pass this message. I mean, performance, I guess, could be a name of a track, because it is very, like, it has some, I guess, brings interest to the eyes, and then we could look and put that. But I guess source control strategy I put in there because I would like this content to be somewhere, but I confess I don't know yet. Maybe with other ideas. Yeah.
I think that's very interesting, but there is a tiny problem with that. I might be wrong what I'm going to say, but vast majority of submissions are not really written for a specific track. So majority of people who submit something, they don't go to see the tracks and say, okay, I'm going to write a submission for this track, looks interesting. Simply, people already have their abstracts, and then they try to find in a list which track it belongs to. So kind of having a track like version control something will not likely going to increase the number of submissions for that track. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I think it is, but it's not going to increase the likelihood that we are going to have such talks, or absence of it is not going to decrease it either, right?
Right, but we are creating these track names so that people at least don't submit something that's completely unrelated, right? So it's like a guidance. I understand. I agree also. Like as I said that the name source control strategy might not be like the most, is not gonna like help much, and that's why. But I put there as like ideas to put as a part of the maybe another track that could allow like some part of this content here to be like saying,
yep.
how do people manage code base growth, basically, like even if it's just that, could be somewhere.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when we have the tracks, like sometimes the tracks we put in the CFP don't reflect, we change them by the time we get to the final program based on the submissions. But I do think we should be treating the call for papers as, here is your guide to your best chance of getting a talk approved by the program committee, because we're telling you what we're looking for. And if you're looking for talks like this that lean towards, best practices around source control strategy or around performance, I think we should find a way to indicate that. So we're then saying anybody who reads that and gives us what we're asking for, they just have the best chance of getting their talk accepted. But where to put that is the other question. Or any thoughts? Do those fit in with some of the existing tracks? I'm going to have a look.
I was thinking about Victor's idea of, kind of leading, at least at this stage, with, kind of ninja through beginner, or, whichever way you say it. And what if we did something like that? Not saying the conference has to turn out that way, but what if we did it that way and then said, hey, for the topics, and then we can list out all of the main categories of topics that we've kind of pulled together as tracks with enough detail to give, people context for thinking. And then that will help us drive how the content will get created. But the more I'm thinking about it, I like the idea of really promoting thinking about, the content level, because I've submitted all these for people all the time, and you say, what level is it? And they go, I don't know, just do it for intermediate. It's not like it's really a thought. It's a necessity to check a box on a form. And if we lead with it the other way, and then we have all of those as kind of the main categories of things that we want to keep driving and collecting, then we get this great wealth of content coming in that we can then massage into what makes sense for the actual conference.
Exactly. In that case, we would actually ourselves, we would be forced to actually think about what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of what is a ninja track, right? Kind of like we would need to come up with a couple of like paragraph or two. Okay, so this, and that.
Yeah, and there are some good definitions, like, kind of the elite, I don't like the term elite performers, but we use it all over the place. But there are some of those things that are there. I think where you get in the middle is going to be the harder part, right? And exactly where that is. But that doesn't feel like that would be, if we don't make it too structured and we make it like, it feels like it
well, and that's
is
where
doable.
what system are we using for CFP submission?
Jennifer C., do you want to speak to that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, what system are we using for CFP submission?
SurveyMonkey. It's part of there. It's SM Apply, which is part of SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, okay. Because what I typically see with like Sessionize, for instance, is people self-select what their talk is, like how talk, like what's the is this beginner, is it experienced, is it, and they select what they feel it is.
Correct.
And then they also add tags, select from a list of tags of, well, this would be, you know, about this, and they could have like 2 or 3 tags, and we could use that because they're kind of, you know, self saying what they feel like it would be for. We could use that to help build out what all this looks like.
Well, yes, because one of the questions we normally ask in the CFP is where they place it, and it's either beginner, intermediate, advanced, or any level.
Right.
We give them those 4 options. So yes, they have to self-select.
So we could almost lead with that if we have a way of spelling that out, if we could articulate that. Or Jennifer, if you had a way of speaking to what those levels are. Sorry, Jennifer H. Yeah, maybe we could, if you could have a bash at writing what that looks like, we could lead with that as a way of tagging your talk and a way of us choosing them. Anyway, sorry, Jennifer S., you wanted to say something?
I was just reading the other tracks, and regarding the source control strategy part, I think that could be part of the leadership track. Like it could fit there because there's culture, there is in the stuff that says like scaling, culture. So maybe it could be something that could fit in there, some sort of like operations process, like developer. This is like developer productivity as well. So we could maybe fit that if we don't find anything, just to conclude a bit that the question
okay.
is there.
Thanks. I've put some notes on the doc so Cara can see this.
Yeah, feel free to assign me an action item. I can draft something that people can bash on. I'm happy to give something for people to look at.
Yeah, if you could, and then if Victor, you have any thoughts as well. And just related to that, I will say there's a best practices special interest group who are trying to put together some material around best practices, and they've ended up having this kind of conversation a lot. And it always comes back to, if we're creating this dynamic body of work that gives you indicators of best practices, the first thing people need to do is assess where they are. And they've started getting to a better way of helping people assess, are you completely new and you need convincing that CD is a good thing? Are you convinced it's a good thing, but you just need to know how to get started in different areas? Or are you kind of an expert and you're just sharing what you've done? So I might go and look at some of the work they've done there, and if we've got some proposals, we can tie that in as just a way of helping people assess where they are and which talks would be best for them. And yeah, the more we can do in the program to help people in that way, it will be great. Great. Okay, how are we doing for time? Anything else on tracks that we haven't covered that folks want to comment on? Anything else new that was added to the document we haven't covered?
I just think, like, I know that we're really trying to nail these down, but if we're still potentially playing with the idea of doing like 30-second, this is what this track is videos, I think that's also something that, we can look forward to put a little bit more explanation behind. So if you think like we could do a general, like if you think your topic is doesn't fit, just pick something and we will help you, navigate where it needs to go and stuff like that. If that's something that we were still thinking about doing, I think,
let me show you what we have used in the past and see if this is good enough or if you have any comments. So typically we'll put them down as suggested topics, track focus, and then this is kind of the indicator of just saying, just pick your best fit, and we'll do the work in the back end in the program committee to sort of qualify it. And I just dropped the link to that. So any comments? And just to this discusussion, interesting discussion in the chat about best practices, better practices, good practices. And I think that's pretty interesting. I think the group, we started using the word emerging practices. I think Jane Grohl had led us to use that one as a way of saying, okay, these things are new and here's some of the emerging practices people are finding effective. But, good note on that. Okay, so if there's nothing further on CFP to discuss now, please go ahead and keep commenting on those documents or having the conversations in chat. I'd like to switch a little to talking about keynotes or just getting some ideas from folks around what you'd like to see for keynotes, either specific people or themes. And so a couple of things to say about keynotes. We will have one whole session, which will be keynotes that we'd like to see that address the domain of software delivery. And then we are looking for keynote ideas. This year, we'd like to have things that break us out of our bubble and get us thinking about the wider world. So more kind of inspirational type speakers and topics, which we can still connect to what we're doing, but it's not like just breaking people out of our bubble. So it's not all DevOps or software delivery. So with that being said, would folks like to throw out any and every names or ideas or themes that they might have for keynotes at CDCon this year? Who would you be excited to hear speak, or what topics would you be excited to have people speak about?
Question. It'd be interesting to see how
this year's been hard. Go ahead, Jeremy.
It'd be interesting to see how it fits. But Emily Freeman's talk she's been giving recently around DevOps Revolution is actually, I think, a really interesting topic that begs more and more conversation around the software development lifecycle. And while it's not about continuous delivery, continuous deployment, it is at a core of what drives continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Like it's at a core of that. So it'd be interesting to have her as a speaker around that. Her and I were talking about, we didn't talk about the conference, but just the mindset around it. I'd encourage you to go and watch some of the talks she's given on it, and just kind of get a feel. I could see that being an interesting, kickoff to the conference or an interesting conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, great suggestion. Anything else? Don't be shy. Anyone you've seen?
I don't know what it is, but something thought-provoking about where things are going. I mean, so many. I mean, not calling it trends because everything seems to be a trend, but there's so many things that are changing, right? And jobs are changing. how people do their jobs are changing, even what the definitions of things are changing, and something to really focus on, kind of the excitement of where we are and what's happening in the industry and kind of the progression of where things have, taken. It would be a great thing to get people like kind of excited about the subject. But beyond that idea, I don't know who the best person to give that talk is or what it would actually cover.
Yeah, no, there's an interesting, I was going to say, just building on that theme, I have seen some speakers who will talk about like the future of work and, how we think about productivity and how it sort of started off. Everything is based on like factories and how they were set up and how actually we need to evolve it, and how COVID is pushing folks to do that with remote work and, introducing things like four-day work weeks and things like that. I'll try and look up the talk. I'll send it around to the group. But yeah, future of work kind of trends in the space.
Yeah, and then possibly something with, even the, I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry, it'll come back to me in a second. Yeah. Oh, one of the things that I think is extremely interesting for a lot of people, and we don't have, it's always one of the hard things, but it's how to quantify. It's kind of the ROI question, right? And it's kind of like how these things are evolving, but also how do you measure that? Like, how do you measure productivity? Like, how do you measure the benefit that a solution, that you don't have to create from scratch, it's homegrown, that you have to support and evolve and et cetera, et cetera. How do you, it's kind of like the same evolution of the technology and the terminology in the industry, but it's also the progression of the workforce. And it's kind of that other angle. And it's almost like, we're at this turning point where this is becoming, something people need to have versus, some people have because they're at that point. And how do you imagine a world of where it goes next or something? I don't know. It might be the same talk. I'm just waving my hands right now.
Thanks.
It would be interesting to get some well, two. Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I mean, well, I think that those are all good things. We still need to come up with a name because kind of like we are not going to tell. I don't know, Kelsey. Can you speak about that? He's probably so. We should just pick a name, right? And that person is going to come up with something very interesting if he's good, and we're going to pick good ones. So it's relatively straightforward if you come up with a list of 5 names or something like that, right?
What if we could get like a Kelsey and a Jeff Barr having a candid conversation about the future of CI/CD, where it's going, like, or big names like that kind of have these followings, and let
Kelsey
them come
Hightower. Patrick Debois, for example, is very much focused now on what's coming next, and he's abandoning DevOps. He's a father of DevOps, so that combination would be very good. So either of the two to begin with.
Yeah, there's a big philosophy that out there that like DevOps is gonna like ultimately die and as a thing, and then there's gonna be the other thing. So, but
it's going to be the same thing with a different name. That's how our
exactly.
works.
That's what I mean. Yeah. It doesn't go away. It just means it's distributed to everybody's job instead of a specific job. But that would be awesome to get Kelsey. I have him. He is moderating a talk for CDF soon, so we could see what his thoughts are, because this is the kind of stuff he likes to do. I also could see if I could get like a Jeff Barr if we're interested in that. I don't know how they do, but I kind of have a personal goal at some point to get them both on stage and see how they interact with each other.
Awesome.
So it could be an interesting thing, right, to get those two audiences there. And then if you get someone from like Azure, like if you get someone from Microsoft, Google, and AWS really talking about the future of this from the cloud perspective, that could be like a big draw with some interesting content possibly.
Other ideas, other names, anything else?
We already talked about it, but I'm not sure if it's included in our thoughts about the continuous learning thing, like to actually.
Oh, as a keynote, yeah.
Yeah. So just as a pin there.
I'll note that here. Like that. Laurie, anything from your side?
No, I think I'm still just trying to think like in terms of inspiration, maybe, you know, like, is that something that we've done before where it's just not, like, I was just at All Things Open. Jeremy, you were there, and the keynote was the NASA guy, and the whole theme was like, you know, astronauts and spaceships and stuff. He went really long, but it was still that whole idea, like, they landed the Mars rover, you know, like, it was just like something that took this many years actually happened, and look, you know, and so there was technical stuff to it, but more so it's just kind of like inspiration, don't ever give up, look how far we came.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if that was something that would fit the audience, or if they're just like, I don't want to hear your happy little pep talk about, you know, what my magnet on the fridge says, you know, like a cat on the wall, just hang in there, like it will get better type stuff, you know?
Yeah, no, I think we should do. Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was going to expand on that just slightly, of that there's part of what made that a great talk was that, at least in my view, is that, so we're at an open source conference. He's talking about open source software that's been used by the community to put a rover on Mars. Like, there's the inspiration piece, but there's also the practical, like, application of the thing, which for this was open source, into, for lack of a better way of saying it, the real world. So there is a piece where I think that really could be interesting around this, of, you know, the practical applications of continuous delivery. I know a member of my team just had a conversation with somebody that is using, you know, just happens to be using our platform, but is using it to do nuclear physics and to do nuclear, like, it's those types of things that I think are interesting, because it steps out of what our normal thoughts of what does it look like to do continuous delivery? What does it look like to do, you know, software development? All of that, it kind of tilts it on a head a little bit and gives us some inspiration to go and do something new. So yeah, I mean, I think all of this kind of goes together, but that's what really stood out to me. I think, you know, Laurie, with what you were saying and how I think that could really translate for us.
So who's this nuclear physicist guy? You know, like, who inspires you right now, you know?
Yeah, I need to go find out.
Sheldon.
That'd be awesome.
Right.
I would be there in person for that one. The one talk that I just really resonated with me, and I loved it, and it's helped a lot of people kind of on my team that are not technical understand things, is I had Edith, the CEO at Launch Sharply, did a podcast with, a webinar conversation with our former CEO and Pulumi CEO. That part doesn't matter, but she really likened the whole continuous delivery experience to an inventory model. And it just played itself out so well. It's like, and then she started talking about the code, and, you know, things are on the shelves and they get stale. And so not saying it. So, I mean, somebody like her that can, or like the other analogies we've talked about here, I think anything that can really get the concepts down to a level that people truly understand and can fit the pieces together is a good way of getting people more engaged that way.
Yeah, if you have a link to that podcast, that would be great. I'll stick it in.
Yeah, it's actually a panel, but I will give it to you momentarily.
But yeah, no, I think all the suggestions are great. Any tech conference I've been to where someone's come from NASA or talked about space is always met really well. And there's one GitHub satellite I was at where, is it that lady, Katie, I can't recall her name, but when they discovered the black holes, and it was all collaboration, and here's how we all work together on a global scale to do it. yeah, that was pretty inspiring and just connected to the whole idea of open source communities. Great. Okay, so yeah, keep the ideas coming and scribble them down in the doc or just drop them in Slack, specific talks or themes. And this isn't a priority right now, like the program is the main thing, but we will start soon reaching out to keynote speakers or just exploring different types of combinations of folks we want to get on stage. Okay, and let's leave it there, just looking at the time. Our next call will be next week on the 14th, and that will be the final one by which we're having in person ahead of the 17th of December deadline for the call for papers. So any changes we're making around levels and beginners and things like that, we'll need to have those in a good state so we can meet, finalize those, and then get that to Jennifer Crawley by the 17th, with the view to the call for papers going live in January next year. So we'll continue the conversation asynchronously. I'll share the recording as well for those who couldn't make it. And Carol will be back from Thursday to keep that conversation going and follow up with folks on any specifics that are there. Anything else folks want to add or ask before we go?
Where is the keynote notes?
I put it in our main agenda item. Sorry, I was just scribbling some notes there. And you can add to that list, or maybe Clara will organize something. I think that's a fine place to use for now. And we can use that to save any links to speakers or talks. Anything else? Okay, thanks everybody for your time and for the great discussions. Have a good week.
Bye, y'all.
Cheers.